What if I told you that the iPhone 14 Pro Max is arguably the best iPhone ever made? Would you believe me? Now, the iPhone 14 Pro Max is a phone that has been aging very well, especially when you compare it to every other top tier phone on the market. The 14 Pro Max has given me the exact same experience, and I found it to be a really good phone when it came to battery, how smooth it ran software, and the overall feel of it. It has a Super Retina XDR display with Pro Motion, which means that you'll get a very smooth feeling when scrolling. It almost has the best battery out of any smartphone I've ever used, and is very comparable to the 13 Pro Max. It has an A16 Bionic chip that holds up extremely well and can basically run any app with no hesitation, and it has the smoothest iOS experience based on my day-to-day use with it. And I know that there are many of you out there that want to know if you could get the iPhone 14 Pro Max a couple months after its release, and this video is going to help you decide. Now, looking at display, the iPhone 14 Pro Max has a 6.7-inch Super Retina XDR display that, just like the iPhone 13 Pro Max, was very good. Whenever I was scrolling through my phone, it looked very nice, everything looked good, the responsiveness was very precise, and I had no complaints about the overall feel. The 120Hz display made this phone feel insanely smooth. The scrolling was definitely comparable to other top-tier flagships, and it's still holding up very well to this day. But the only problem that I did have with the 120Hz refresh rate was the fact that whenever I was scrolling through certain apps, you could tell that they weren't 120. Like whenever I'm scrolling through apps like Eventbrite or any other bottom tier app, I could tell that it doesn't support the Pro Motion, and hopefully every other iOS app can catch up. Now, the bezels are extremely small. Right here, you can see that they're wrapped nicely around the screen and are much cleaner overall. The notch is also completely gone. It's in pill-shaped form, but it's still not as noticeable when I'm watching movies or playing a game. Now, when it comes to brightness, the iPhone 14 Pro Max is at 2000 nits, which is brighter than the iPhone 13 Pro Max, and I really noticed the difference when I was outside. I no longer had trouble seeing the screen, and because I live in LA, there's much less shade, so there were many times where the screen held its own. And now when it comes to the size of the 14 Pro Max, I can't tell you whether or not you will love it or hate it, but I do want to list some pros and cons that you could look out for. Now, the pros of having a big screen is that the viewing experience is much better, the battery is bigger so it'll be able to last longer, and bigger screens tend to have slightly better resolution. And now the cons of having a big screen is that it makes it much harder to use with one hand. Trying to simply reach the top of the screen requires more work, and you'll need some pretty big pockets if you want to store your phone. But again, I want to let you guys outweigh the pros and cons because everyone's needs are different. Now, another problem that I had with the display was the fact that Apple still hasn't added a fingerprint sensor. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that the iPhone has the best facial recognition in the game with Face ID, but it still would have been nice to add an extra function when unlocking my phone. Now, the resolution and viewing experience of the 14 Pro Max's display is an amazing benefit when it comes to actually using the phone. I was able to see everything very clearly when watching videos. Playing games on it was as fun as ever, and I wanted to give you guys an idea of what it would look like when watching something and playing a game.
Bobby Portis.
As again, the T-Wolves showing zone early and then switching to the man-to-man.
Now, the 14 Pro Max has a 4300 mAh battery that is the exact same as the iPhone 13 Pro Max and was easily able to last me all day with no problem, even with heavy use. And mind you, I'm the type of person that is usually on my phone all day doing things like writing scripts, playing B-roll, shooting videos, scrolling through social media, watching YouTube videos, and texting my friends. And I'm usually getting over 7 hours of screen time a day, and I only charge my phone when I'm sleeping. I didn't have to put my phone on power saving mode. Most of the time I did use it to the max, and it was still able to perform very well. So if you do get the 14 Pro Max, battery won't be an issue. And if I could give you guys a quick estimate, I would say that my battery is usually on 25% by the end of the day, which is really good, but it wasn't as good as my 13 Pro Max, but again, it wasn't that far off. And right now my battery health is at 100%. iPhones are known to have the battery significantly drop after a few months, so I was really surprised that my phone was still on 100%. Now, the last thing that I wanted to touch on when it came to the battery was the charging, and if I'm being honest, the charging isn't that great in terms of speed. It will take me well over an hour to get to 100%, but like I said before, you only need one charge, so I think the long-lasting battery is a great trade-off. Now, looking at software, the 14 Pro Max supports iOS 16, and just like on any other iPhone, you have the app drawer that holds and categorizes all your apps. You have the new wallpaper system that is a huge upgrade and feels much smoother on this phone, and you have many more minor things that makes the phone feel even sleeker. But just because all of this stuff is designed to be sleeker doesn't mean that it'll make it. Like, there were many times where my pill notch on my 14 Pro Max would freeze on me and I would have to restart the phone for it to correct itself. And this didn't happen every day, but I wanted to keep you guys updated on how it's holding up. But besides the frequent freezes, most of the time the software was very smooth and worked very well. It felt just like the 13 Pro Max, and I feel like most of you guys will realize that in terms of software, it's really not that much different from other models. I also decided to test out some games on my iPhone 14 Pro Max. I play Asphalt 9, which is a game that can really test out the chip, and as you can see right here, it's holding up very well, and I didn't get any lags while playing. Now, the haptics were pretty great if I'm being honest. There were many times where I would have my phone on vibrate, I wouldn't miss any calls, and I feel like compared to many other phones, whenever my phone is on vibrate, I miss the least amount of notifications when I'm using my iPhone. And now the final thing that I wanted to note is that the iPhone 14 Pro Max will be getting at least 5 years worth of software upgrades. So when it comes to longevity, it's definitely got you covered. Now, just like the iPhone 13 Pro Max, the 14 Pro Max has some really loud speakers that were pretty good whenever I used them. I would usually use them in the house whenever watching videos on social media or YouTube. And I didn't have to turn it all the way up because of how loud they were on the lower tiers of volume. And I also tested out how they sounded when playing music. And if I'm being honest, they're loud, but the quality is pretty mid when the volume gets to the max. And I also use my phone as my alarm, and I had no problem waking up from it, and I didn't really have to set multiple because the first one was enough. And right here, I'm going to give you guys an idea of how the speakers sound.
He's alone on the right wing. What a move! I like it. I like it. World peace for everyone. Here he comes. Bryant to Bowman to send home. Oh my God. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding?
Now, the iPhone 14 Pro Max has a 48 megapixel main camera along with a 12 megapixel front and a 12 megapixel ultra wide, and based on my usage over the past couple of months, I would say that the pictures look amazing. Now, starting with zoom modes, the Pro Max has a couple of different zoom modes, and of course the quality gets dumbed down a bit once you get closer or use the ultra wide, but I found all of the zoom modes to be great when compared to other smartphones. Now, the shutter speed was very good from the start. I decided to test this out by shooting a moving car, and as you can see right here, the camera was able to capture it most of the time, and the pictures look really good, so I was pretty satisfied. Now, next up, I wanted to show you guys how the camera performed in different environments, and the first environment that I will be starting with is daytime. Now, looking at outside photos, we can see that they have a really great shadow of depth whenever I'm taking pictures of myself, along with a really nice blur, and this is scaled all the way up once I use the portrait mode that Apple has always been good at. I also took some photos of random street objects, the sky, different aspects of nature, and I can honestly say that the 14 Pro Max held up very well in these environments, and I'm really impressed. Now, taking a look at inside photos, the Pro Max was able to capture everything very nice, and I found the pictures to be slightly more detailed than the 13 Pro Max in terms of sharpness. Even when I'm taking selfies, you can see how the camera handles already good lighting to produce an overall nicely taken photo. My skin tone looked really good, and the sharpness was at its peak. And now when it comes to shooting video, the 14 Pro Max is easily the best phone that you can buy in this price range. You have many different modes and frame rates to choose from, but I prefer to shoot my videos in 4K at 30 frames per second because not only does it look good in 4K, but the 30 frames makes it look smooth and realistic. The video stabilization was out of this world. I shoot videos with my iPhone, so whenever I'm shooting my subject, I can use everything in handheld and the movements will be very smooth, which was very impressive. And for fun, I decided to try out the new action mode, and if I'm being honest, it's insanely good, but for most people, you'll be completely fine with regular stabilization, especially since action mode will also dumb down the video quality, so it's really not needed. So all in all, I would definitely say that the 14 Pro Max has an amazing video camera that'll give you some consistently good shots. So if you're someone who wants to shoot content or you just want a solid camera, this phone has got you covered. Also, here's some extra videos that I was able to get. So here's the final question. Is the iPhone 14 Pro Max worth buying a couple of months after its release? Well, in my personal opinion, I would say that it's a really great phone and it is worth buying, but I still will wait for the iPhone 15 Pro Max. And I really like the iPhone 14 Pro Max. It has an amazing battery life, it has less bugs than most other iPhones, and it gives you a really great experience across the board. And if you are someone who does prefer the iPhone 14 Pro Max, it's definitely a phone that you'll be very satisfied with. But there it is, you guys, my review on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. And also, if you guys have any other questions for me, you can let me know down in the comment section, and I'm gonna see you guys in the next one. Peace.